hard to interrupt conversation because I know that one of the wonderful things about having you all is having everyone get to know one another. Really great to have you back here this morning and to see the clouds lifting. I hope nobody was out in that terrible storm. We're going to continue the real heart of our global colloquium today and discuss how the UN and universities can empower women. And in the course of that, very importantly, change the world. One woman who has certainly left her imprint on the world is the great Chilean author, Isabel Allende. Once, when asked if feminism is dated, she answered as follows: "Not for most of our sisters in the rest of the world who are still forced into premature marriage, prostitution, forced labor," bringing us down to earth. Allende understands what's at stake in efforts to empower women. And if we ever forget what's at stake, we who don't live amidst those women, I think words like that bring us down to earth. But not only does Allende understand that, but our distinguished speaker and our wonderful participant in this global colloquium does. Michelle Bachelet is the first Under-Secretary General of the United Nations for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women. It's a very appropriate title. Michelle Bachelet is used to being a first. She was the first woman president of Chile and the first female defense minister in all of Latin America. A longtime champion of women's rights, Ms. Bachelet has been a powerful advocate for gender equality and women's empowerment throughout her career. She personifies, in my mind, women's empowerment. While serving as the Chilean Minister of Health, she focused on reforming primary care facilities in order to improve health care for families and children. As defense minister, she introduced policies to improve the conditions of women in the military and police forces. And her 2005 presidential election campaign focused on meeting the needs of the country's poor and on promoting the rights of women and indigenous communities, helping to give voice to the voiceless. When Ms. Bachelet was president of Chile, fully half of her cabinet ministers were women. She also championed women-friendly policies, tripling the number of free daycare centers for low-income families. In 2008, Time magazine ranked her 15th on its list of the world's most influential people. And I dare say it would have been #1 if you count the importance of what she was doing and the trend setting of her important power. She would leave office as one of the most popular presidents in Chile's history. In her new position, the former pediatrician and epidemiologist is now promoting female empowerment across the globe. On taking up her new role, she said, "We have an historic opportunity to accelerate the achievement of what champions of gender equality have worked towards for years." At its core, the champions of gender equality have worked for a world, in the words of Allende, where the quality of life is enriched for everybody, not just for the privileged. I can think of few people who have championed this goal by ensuring greater equality and justice more tirelessly, more effectively, more admirably than our speaker. It's now our great pleasure to introduce and hear from Michelle Bachelet.
Good morning. Well, President Gutmann, distinguished President, distinguished participant, and honored guest. It is really a pleasure to be invited to give this keynote address on empowering women to change the world, what universities and the UN can do. And the issue could not be more important because I am so convinced that higher education, once the privilege of the elite, is increasingly within reach of the majority, including women and girls, in all countries. Education at all levels, but higher education specifically, gives women options, empowers them to be independent thinkers and agents of change, because the world is changing, and yesterday the SGs spoke about that, and all of us cannot look at what is happening in the North Africa and not see the countries that rely on promises of stability based on unchanging leadership and rigid conceptions of social and gender roles are no longer sustainable. The frustrated dreams and aspirations of those left out have thrust millions into the streets, women alongside men demanding opportunities to lead and contribute to the revitalization of their societies and economies. This is an exciting time for women in all countries. Governments are recognizing that cannot continue to develop and prosper without fully engaging one half of their population. I always speak, because I always think that when we speak about these issues, we need to think on what people can understand and hear. That's why whatever I'm going to talk, my main issue is how to build a very strong case, not only that gender equality and women's empowerment is essential to avoid all those situations that President Gutmann remember us on Isabel Allende's words, but also because I'm so convinced that women are so powerful force, so important agents of development, of change, and to anybody to lose that enormous capacity, talent, is really a shame. And when I went, as you know, I was invited, no, you probably don't know, but I was invited by my national football team to go with them last year after being president to South Africa. We went there. And we were talking to men, we were saying, you know what, is that our coach would have brought the half of the national team to the World Cup. It would be never been able to get into the second round as we get. We need the whole population. We need women and their capacity and their talents. I know I don't need to convince you, but I just mentioned this because I truly believe that when we're talking on gender equality and women's empowerment, we need to work very hard, saying that women's rights are humans' rights, but probably very few politicians will change their decisions based on only the concept of human rights. We need to develop a stronger case in terms of politically, economically, and socially demonstrated why women are essential. And I believe universities can do a lot helping us, provided that evidence and that information. But I mentioned that many governments are recognize that they need to include women in their development, in the development of the society. And as the Secretary General mentioned yesterday, there was this historical decision by the UN member states to create UN Women, consolidating 4 smaller entities into a larger and better resource organization. And that is also a clear sign that member states decided that we needed to make sort of a higher step in the struggle for gender equality and women's empowerment. It signals a long-sought recognition that achieving gender equality and women's rights is regarded on a par with other pressing global issues, including ending poverty and hunger, reducing infant and maternal mortality, and tackling the problems of climate change. And I think that one of the issues that is very important, and probably is not the issue we're talking today, but how could we think on women out of, as if the women were in a bubble? I mean, we have a problem in the world today with the world's governance. We have food crisis, we have energy crisis, we have financial crisis that led to unemployment. We have climate change. There's a lot of crises going on, and there has been a difficulty of the international community in finding ways to govern this kind of crisis. So I think something that the universities should be dealing with too is which is the world we want to live in, which is the model of development that we want to lead in, because women are not outside of this issue. So I would say that all of these issues also create challenges, as the impact of the world's economic crisis in the last 40 years continues to be felt. One of the most urgent challenges is to address the chronic poverty and insecurity faced by the majority of the world's women. Yesterday, I think President Gutmann mentioned 60% of the poor of the world are women and girls. But we also know that other challenges like climate change, which women in many countries, particularly low-income countries, also already experience as a daily reality. And a third, as the new headlines from Japan daily remind us, is the need to continue to search for safe, reliable, and clean energy sources. Fundamental to our ability to meet these challenges is a well-educated citizenship. The theme of the UN Commission on the Status of Women this year, access and participation of women and girls to education, training, and science and technology, underline this fact. The transition from education to work remains fraught with many challenges, particularly in Africa and South Asia, where women lag behind in access to higher education, as well as in those countries in Europe and elsewhere, where women now equal or surpass men in terms of advanced degrees, but still face barriers to professional employment opportunities. And this is especially true in science and technology, where few women head scientific institutions or large technology companies. Women are also underrepresented in research and development, whether in academia, the public sector, or private companies. And globally, women average only 29% of researchers in any of these fields. Why is this so? Well, I think we have to make much more research to be sure, but while evidence shows like little or no gender difference in performance, even though former President Sanders thought it's different, but the evidence shows not much difference. People still generally associate men with mathematics and science and women with humanities and caregiving fields. And these gender stereotypes permeate society and persist in academia and in the media. And yesterday, Secretary General mentioned Gina Davis' words because she's doing a lot of work working in Hollywood with filmmakers, telling them they cannot continue showing women as the weak part of the society. We need to show also women leaders because role models are so important, and show women a way, little girls, where what they can expect and that what can they work for. And I think it is time to break this cycle. And in the report of the CSW, the Commission on the Status of the Women, science, technology, and innovation can speed efforts to eradicate poverty, achieve food security, fight diseases, improve the quality of education, increase decent work opportunities, and improve environmental sustainability, all critical to address challenges in today's world. And developing women's competencies and ensuring their equal access to all fields of education will widen the talents and perspectives countries can draw on to meet these challenges, and enable women to compete for new jobs in the growing green economy on an equal basis with men. And universities have a major role in making this happen. An Economist survey in 2005 found that while universities are still one of the most important engines of the knowledge economy, competition is obligating them to rethink their mission, find new ways to mobilize resources, and forge new partnerships. Those that seek to be at the forefront of the global agenda, as this global colloquium points out, are also seeking new ways to make their voices heard, create momentum for change, and generate broad-based impacts at all levels. And to a striking degree, these are the same issues and challenges that the United Nations system is currently grappling with. Certainly, it is true also for UN Women, because as we develop our strategic plan for the next 3 years, we're addressing the same questions. How will we impact relevance, how will impact, relevance, and effectiveness be defined and measured? At what level? How can we amplify women's voices and leadership, create momentum for change, and generate broad-based results at all levels? What we're beginning to understand is that progress must be measured in absolute as well as relative terms. How far have countries come compared to where they started in terms of closing knowledge gaps, including that based on gender? For example, a recent news report noted that only one African university, the University of Cape Town, is among the world's top ranked universities. Yet, according to UNESCO, There are now 4.5 million students in secondary schools in sub-Saharan Africa, up from only 200,000 in 1970, which is already an amazing achievement in terms of education. So how will universities help open doors for these young graduates, giving them the knowledge and skills they will need to get decent jobs in today's world? How will they make sure that the avenues of social mobility that universities open up are as broad for women as there are for men, both as faculty and as students? And how can UN Women and other UN agencies help? When Global Colloquium was created, it was thought to seek the expertise of scholars on major problems facing the world and to explore how to promote the value that higher education offers to society, not just individuals. One of the major problems today, as Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has stated, is increasing inequalities, increasing those based on gender. They have accompanied economic growth in the last 2 decades. He has brought this network of university leaders together with UN Women so that we can work together to reduce social and gender inequality and promote women's leadership in all sectors of society. In the 5 months since I've been here, I have spoken to many people in UN agencies, in governments, in women's groups, and other civil society organizations. And the messages that I have heard are that UN Women must focus on a few issues and achieve visible results, that we must work in partnership with the UN system, not in competition, but that we must build on what we have achieved, but at the same time do even better. I heard a lot, do better with less. That's something probably you have heard also. And we must think outside the box. And to meet these expectations, we intend to work closely with a variety of partners, including government, civil society, academia, and the private sector. And we will build on the strength on the 4 entities that became UN Women, combining our ability to advance global agreements on gender equality with programmatic support to countries to implement those agreements. But we'll also go beyond this and generate support and results that extend far beyond the sum of our parts. And as the first head of this new entity, I'm determined that UN Women will be a catalyst for change, offering new energy, generating new ideas, and bringing together men and women from different countries and constituencies to advance the gender equality agenda. And my vision for UN Women, as you probably have read in UN Women's vision, is one where women and girls, men and boys have equal opportunities and capabilities, where women are empowered and the principles of gender equality are embedded in all efforts to achieve human rights, peace, and security. And that's why, after thinking really, what's what we have to do? Because there's a lot of other agencies working on women's issues and gender issues. And when UN Women was established, the General Assembly clearly stated that we will not replace the rest. They need to continue doing not only the same, but much better. And so UNDP will continue working on women in development. UNAIDS will continue working with women and girls living with HIV/AIDS. And UNICEF will continue working with the girl child and girls. And UNFPA will continue working on women and sex and reproductive rights. So what we should do, I asked myself, what should we do? Because there's so much more we need to do. And we cannot be stepping on each other's toes, and we cannot go into turf battles because it's too much what we have to do. So which are the areas that really are essential for UN Women? And my answer is clearly one, empowerment. In every area that we could go through, if women are not empowered, they will never have real rights and the real possibilities. Because if women are not relevant, if women do not have something to, if I may say, in many places to negotiate, it's very difficult that women will be sitting at the table. They will probably be beneath the table. So that's why I define women's empowerment, not only because it's the name of the entity, women's empowerment, but I mean, when I think where I will focus in women's empowerment. And probably the least developed of the progress on women's in the world is the capacity of women to be heard, their voices to be heard, at the top decision positions in politics and in economics. But starting for politics, yesterday the Secretary General mentioned that less than 10% of the head of states and government were female. Yes, as a matter of fact, of the 192 member states of the United Nations, only 19 female, are head of governments of head of states are female. Only 19% of parliamentarians in the world are female. So clearly, there's a lot. I mean, wherever you go, women are there, organizing the communities, doing the job, doing the hard work, I would say. I just came Sunday in Dadaab. That's a refugee camp of the Somalis in the frontier in Kenya with Somalia. I thought I was going to a refugee camp, but I didn't think that this is a refugee camp that is there for 20 years. And it's it's going to be soon the third city, I mean, in terms of population of Kenya. 350,000 people are living there. But there, the women were the ones who fetch the water, carry the water for kilometers, very heavy water. So women are very strong, but they're not being able yet to be in very top position at the political level, and I'll talk a little bit later on the economic level. Well, I said that women's leadership and participation is very important for us. The second, of course, is enhancing women's economic empowerment. The third is ending violence against women and girls. And the fourth is engaging women fully in peace and security process and agenda. And of course, this has to be done through ensuring that and making that gender equality goals are central to national development planning and budgeting. And also something that was mentioned yesterday that is very important is to build the capacity in many countries to have gender disaggregated statistics, because it's very difficult to measure progress in countries where they don't disaggregate the data. Well, each of these priorities entails research and data analysis, particularly at country level, with indicators against which to measure gender gaps and progress in narrowing them, designed to make the case that progress in gender equality benefits society as a whole. And each of these areas also entails actions or results, both in long-term programming and short-term support, with quality and impact measured against established criteria. And finally, each requires us to share stories of transformation, I would say successful stories, demonstrating what is possible when the power of half of the world's population is harnessed for economic growth, political vitality, and social development. Let's take again women's leadership and participation. As I mentioned, the percentage of women in national legislature has increased, yes, but very slowly over the past decade, but still average just over 19%, which means that there are still more than 5 men for every 1 woman legislator. And to address this gap, UN Women works to build capacity of women to run for, and not only run, hopefully to win elections, including training to help them develop political platform and mobilize constituencies. And I mentioned to win election, and that's not something banal, because in many parties where they include some sort of quota, they put women, but they put it also in places where we'll never win. So when I sent to Parliament a law, unfortunately it's still in the freezer there because it's very difficult sometimes with men parliamentarians to get support. We were thinking on how we help women to really have a place. So we thought, okay, the oldest incentive of the world, money. Money for their parties who will put women as candidates, but specifically whose candidate will win those places. But unfortunately, even money was not enough. So I hope one day that goes a little bit further. But really, we need to build that capacity, as I told you, to help them in getting more skills and also in developing political platform and mobilize constituencies. And we have a trust fund called for Gender Equality that is mainly for economical and political empowerment. And UN Women is the one who manages this trust fund and awards substantial financial grants to governments and civil society organizations working to achieve women's political and economic empowerment. And we have some successful stories. In countries as diverse as Albania, Rwanda, Nepal, and South Africa, gender equality advocates have partnered with governments and parliaments to put in place positive measures such as electoral quotas, which have had proven results. Yesterday it was mentioned that only 28 countries in the world have achieved the Beijing 15 years ago goal, and it's also in Millennium Development Goals number 3, is that in order that really women's issues are important, you need to have a critical mass of parliamentarians female, and it was supposed to be 30%. Only 28 countries in the world, from Beijing to now, has achieved this goal, and from those 28, only 5 did not need a quota. All of the rest, in order to get to 30% or more, they need to introduce some sort of affirmative action, if I may say, or quota. And quotas in some places doubled the number of women parliamentarians. In Albania, for example, to 16%. Nepal attains South Asia's highest ever percentage of women legislators, nearly 33%, up from 2%. And this is interesting, because when I talk about women, peace and security, I'll go again to talk about power. And women, after peace and security agreements, usually they receive this following message. And some of this was the one I heard from the Egyptian girls when I went 1 day and a half before the Secretary General had meetings with many of them, women and girls. And they were there in Tahrir Square, and they were there hand by hand, and they were all very good friends, and they were all struggling together. But afterwards, there were the parties who are new parties going, and they heard the following message. It's not your time, girls. We need to stabilize first the society. We need to produce a democratic government. And I understand that if you are going to build a new constitution, you need to be ensured that in that new constitution, women's rights are well represented. So they were very sad, these young girls. They were sad. They said, we expected something different. And I said, but you don't give up. You have to continue working and building partnership in terms of giving women more possibilities. But why I mentioned Nepal is because in Nepal, it was a long civil war, of course, but the Maoist army, the 40% of their soldiers were female. So in the process of peace, they had something to negotiate. They had to give up their guns. They had to go into the peace process. I'm not saying that I will distribute guns to the women, but I want to arm them, give them tools, produce them as constituencies. So they can really have something, so they can be relevant. Because if you are not relevant, you are not important. So you are not in the important processes. So we need to ensure that how to strengthen their organization, their capacities, their leadership, but also the capacity of not only talking on gender issues, the capacity of a woman to be talking about economy, about international affairs, about the things that in politics you have to deal with. But I mentioned, and in Rwanda there was a 30% quota, but through this law, they really could elect a lot of women, the biggest female representation in the world. 54% of the parliament are female in Rwanda. But let's go to economic empowerment, because I told you that I think women are victims of many things, and that's true. But women are very powerful tools of developing the economy. And World Bank, we're working with the World Bank, and the World Bank says that gender equality is smart economics. And there now the World Bank, the IDB, and many banks are really strengthening the efforts on giving women more opportunities. And women who earn their own income can challenge social gender relations. I'm so convinced that the only possibility of really have equal rights is to have economic autonomy. Because if you are completely dependent on somebody else, it's very difficult to stand up and say, look, I have these rights. So that's why we're going to continue supporting women in their capacities of having an income. And also their income and earnings can drive the larger economy. And I think yesterday was mentioned that some report of data from World Economic Forum in the gender gap reports, they calculate that for 114 countries for which we have available data, advances in gender equality correlate positively with higher GNP. And this makes sense because, as I mentioned, the World Bank and others have shown increasing women's labor force participation and earnings generate greater economic growth and produce additional benefits in terms of family health and education. And this is very old. When you pay the subsidies, for example, for the family, for the children, in the past in my country, they paid for the men when they received the weekly payment. I'm talking 50 years ago. Well, sometimes men, after they would work in a construction, they went out, with their friends, happy hours, they took a little, and then the money disappeared. So many years ago in Chile, they started giving them women the money because they know it will be for buying food, buying, texts for the schools and so on. But in many countries, women remain economically marginalized. The UN's MDG report for 2010 indicates that in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, more than 80% of women workers are in the same form of vulnerable employment with no benefits or security, low pay, and in many cases, no pay at all. We know that informal work is it's the most frequent way of employment that we see women. And to address these gaps, UN Women will be working with UN partners and the international financial institution to develop a UN policy that will prioritize reaching the most economically marginalized women, especially in rural areas. Because as UNICEF has concluded, investing in the poorest and most marginalized segments of the population is not only a justice and rights issue, it is indeed, but it's not just. It also offers high rates of return, as much as 60%. Women who have little to start with can achieve more progress with the same amount of money. We will also focus on improving the environment for women in the workplace so that women no longer face deficit in wages and promotion. And together with the ILO, we join UN partners in advocating for a social protection floor that can support those who can no longer work due to illness or age, as well as to those unable to find employment. But also because social protection will give you, with better education, better health, better conditions, you will be also empowered, not only protecting, but your own empowerment to get a better job. But we also will work a lot on SMEs in terms that they can have access to credit. We'll be all working on rural livelihoods with women, because many women do produce great products in agriculture. In many countries of Africa, women are 85% of the agricultural labor force, but they own only 2% of land's rights. In many places, women have inheritance issues that they cannot inherit if the man dies. The land where the family has lived forever and worked forever, and the women has been the working force, will be given to, if she has a son, to his oldest son. If she doesn't have a son, to a brother of the uncle of the husband, and so on. So there's still a lot of issues there where we have to work on. But also we need to work much more in rural areas in terms of ensuring water supply, storage supply, managerial skills, and so on, because many women who don't have in rural Africa places to storage, they need to go to markets very quickly. They need to sell in any price because they cannot negotiate. And if you have storage capacities, you can negotiate and find better prices, because otherwise they will never get out of poverty. As for violence against, and the last issue is women and corporate world. We are working with the private sector in terms of how to improve gender parity at the corporate sector. And I'm talking of top positions. In the United States, I believe it's only 3% of the CEOs are female. So we need to do much more, not only in the developing world, all over the world. Other issue that is all over the world is violence against women and girls. While we lack comparative data on the incidence of, we do know it is widespread and persistent in all countries of the world, costing countries not only terrible pain, but also billions of dollars. In the US, even though I have to say this data is very old, as I find out, conservative estimates put it at US $5.8 billion dollars a year in extra health and mental health care costs, and also lost productivity. Estimated annual cost in Canada totals 1.16 billion, but I don't know when they did this estimation, because a recent study on Australia showed that due to violence against women and girls, it cost Australia $13.6 billion a year. And this includes, of course, direct mental or physical health, but also productivity loss, and also what you do with children, whether women is in the hospital and so on. It's a very comprehensive but very good study, but it shows that this is also, of course, a human rights violation. It's a more pervasive human rights violation, violence against women and girls. But it's also a very important economic issue in a country. In this, in Dadaab refugee camp, speaking with those women, I mean, they they suffered all of the things that you mentioned, and some of them you did not mention. Of course, early marriage, rapes, domestic violence, FGM. I mean, everything was there. But we need more data, more rigorous data. And we also need to think, how come we haven't been able yet to deal with violence, interdomestic violence? I'm not talking violence in conflict countries, because this is a very specific issue. But I'm talking of the United States, Canada. I'm not talking even on poverty. Violence is not linked necessarily to poverty. You see violence, domestic violence, in all classes, in all ethnias, in everywhere. So I really think we're missing something in our strategies. I really think we need to research much more what's going on, what strategies can be successful. For example, talking to people in Liberia, where rape is the biggest crime, 15 a week, and rape for little children, 18 months to 7 years old and more. And some South African friends told me, one of the things in South Africa we forgot to do is what we do with ex-combatants, where rape was used as a means of war. And in all the peace and security agenda, rape is not a sex issue. Well, rape has never been a sex issue. It's always an issue of power. But specifically in those countries, rape is done as a means of war. And it looks like when people get demobilized, they return their guns and so on, many times programs consider how to reinsert them in the society in terms of providing them with some economic support. But to work with how your mindset is completely changed in terms of our values, it looks like nobody has really done it. So we still have a lot of these very terrible issues in many countries. Even though they've been able to develop a democratic country, they're still lacking something. So I think we need to work much more with the universities too, and thinking what else we have to do. Why our strategies have not been successful enough? What are we missing? Maybe from more anthropological, psychosocial point of view. And as I told you, we need to develop standard sets of questions that countries can include in household surveys, so that no country can say, we didn't know that the problem was so bad because we didn't have the data. We're developing a set of minimum standards and services for countries to adopt in responding to such violence, such as by setting up hotlines and shelters, ensuring police protection for those at risk, and access to health care for survivors of such violence. But the other day in an activity, we were with the ministers of, I think it was Sierra Leone and somebody else, and Haiti. And they said, we need more police people there. But we cannot have a police by every house. We need to think in more strategic ways of dealing with violence against women. And finally, what about peace and security? During the UN General Assembly in 1946, Eleanor Roosevelt insisted that women should have the opportunity to, and I quote, share in the work of peace and reconstruction as they did in war and resistance. However, UN Women's research found that in 24 peace processes over the last 2 decades, women form less than 8% of negotiating teams and never the head of a team, with the predictable result that women's needs and concerns are almost entirely missing from peace agreements. And let me mention this. There has been a study of 585 peace agreements concluded between 1990 and 2010. We're not talking after the Second World War. We're talking when the Cold War was ended. And what we found in this 585 peace agreement, that just 16% contain any reference to women at all. Just 3% of those peace accords contain a reference to sexual and gender-based violence. And in just 6 ceasefire agreements ever has sexual violence been identified as a ceasefire violation. And we celebrated last year 10 years of the 1325 Security Council resolution that stated so clear that women should be in the heart of the peace and security agenda. Having said that, some change is happening. The UN, led by the Security Council, has begun to shift from a relief response to a protective response, and this means recognizing the need for customized security measures to prevent mass atrocities, crimes against women in conflict. Progress of this agenda accelerated following the Secretary General's appointment of Margot Wallström as his special representative on sexual violence in conflict, with whom I work closely. And currently we're working with the Department of Peacekeeping Operations to train peacekeepers from major troop contributing countries on preventing and responding to conflict-related sexual violence. And to help us advance this research and action agenda, we're seeking to link our research and policy unit with key research faculty in the universities in countries where we work. As dynamic and important leaders in your countries, you are not only important role models, but you have the power to open doors to make change happen for women and girls. This is why the partnership with academia and universities is so important, and why I included this colloquium among the priority actions of my vision and action plan. So how can we work together to support women to play an equal role in setting the economic and political agenda, making sure that, as Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said last night, change keeps coming from within? For as one of you wrote in response to the background paper, whatever universities and the UN do together cannot be limited to educating individuals, but must consider the roles women play in their social groups and the structures of society which ascribe such roles and which are reflected in constitutions and laws that legitimate them. We have also to anticipate the future. We need universities to continue to support groundbreaking research that UN women can promote in countries worldwide. For years, for example, academics have pioneered new ways to measure women's unpaid work, including time use service, to ensure that women's reproductive labor is taken into account in economic modeling. It is only now that it is starting to be taken up by policymakers, and there is much further to go. And I would like to put forward 4 proposals that we'll be discussing in the sessions. Proposal 1 is to explore how interest faculty can collaborate with UN Women senior policy advisors to contribute to the UN Women research agenda in each of our 5 thematic priorities, but it can be in also other priorities. Proposal 2 is to establish a UN Women's Fellows program, which could create a network of engaged professionals who can forge an ongoing link between the universities and the UN system. Proposal 3 is to establish a UN Women internship program for master's degree students along the lines of those in other UN agencies. And Proposal 4 is to support the Secretary General Global Strategy for Women's and Children's Health. And well, we will be discussing with the faculty expert Proposal 1 and 4, and Proposals 2 and 3 will be put into consideration by the University President session. So before we break into working groups, and before, if I have some time for questions and answers, I want to say that education has made it possible for me to do what I have thought was important throughout my life. Because after graduating from high school, we decided I want to be able to treat people. When I saw in communities who were suffering from all sorts of preventable diseases. So I decided to study medicine because I didn't like social injustice, and health was so important. And I studied in the University of Chile and then in Germany when I was on exile. And later on, after practicing medicine for a number of years, I decided that I like pediatrician and so because it was and also public health. But after that, I decided also that some of the challenges in my country was how we really develop a democratic society that could not be put in danger. So that's why I thought that it was necessary to learn much more about the militaries, and I went and studied military strategy. And I have only to say that, and not because it's something that's different for me, but it's different for the region. I was not the first Minister of Defense in Latin America. I was the first Minister of Defense of the whole Americas, because the United States had never had a defense minister, and Canada either, even in Mexico. But I say it because it seems that the region has also a lot of challenges in this regard. And of course I studied in the U.S. also in terms of and in many academies and so on. And then because of this and because whenever I was in something, I think you have to do it the better you can and work very hard, is that I was appointed first Minister of Health and later Minister of Defense. But yesterday, Michael Dole asked if you can go gradually or if you can go sometimes very quickly on some issues. And I have to say both things, because in some areas you have to go gradually, but you always need to put through political will very important milestones. And when I was Minister of Health, first female Minister of Health in the history of Chile, nobody thought of me as a future president. when I was Minister of Defense. That was symbolically so important because it's so linked to power that everybody could thought, I mean, they had good opinion of my work, but also they saw me as somebody, a potential president. I haven't seen me like that yet at that moment, but they saw me like that. So role models are so important. So that's why for me it's so important to visibilize women, to show their capacities in different areas, because it's not only for, of course, shows men that if their women are capable, but also show other women and can change a cultural change that is so needed in terms of sustain gender equalities and women's empowerment process. And I think that that is very important. That doesn't mean that that makes it for himself. We have had, I mean, not every woman is gender sensitive. I have found that many times in my life. Not every woman, not every female cares about what happens to women. And in Davos, sitting next to some women business, said, I don't like that people introduce me as a woman because I'm good. It's not because I'm a female. And now they tell me, yes, I don't like that either. I mean, I'm a female, but that has nothing to do. I'm a good worker. And I said, you know what? I win the presidential election despite being a woman. But because I'm a woman, it was because I'm good that I win the election. But because I'm a woman, I have to work for all those good women who don't have opportunities. So of course you win because you are good, but you need to think on what happens to other good people that are not having given the opportunity and that were losing that capacity. I'm sure that both, and I think that, and if some people have said that we did a lot of things during my government, probably the more strategic thing, if you say, even if it cannot be shown immediately, is how people change their mind, how people relate to gender issues. When I went to as a candidate, many people told me, I'm not going to vote for you because you're a woman, and I think women are not capable to be president. But let me tell you another story. It's a beautiful story that shows how important are symbolic issues too. Tarja Halonen is the president of Finland for like 9 or 10 years now. She's head of government, state, not of government. But it doesn't matter, the example is good. So she went to a kindergarten and she spoke with many children, 5, 6, 7 years old. She had been 9 years in office. And she started talking to the children saying, what are you going to do when you're grown up? And you can imagine the typical answers of all children, you know, I want to be a nurse, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a pilot, whatever you do. And then she saw a little quiet boy and said, don't you want to be president of the republic? And he said, no, in this country, men cannot be president of the republic. So that's why I think role models, really, and symbolic issues so important. And when I was a medical, a minister of health, young girls, when I went to the shanty town, said, auntie, because in Chile, young people said to the growing-ups, auntie or uncle. Auntie, when I grow up, I want to be like you, a doctor. And afterward, they say, I want to be like you, a president. And maybe, I don't know if ever in Chile's history there will be another woman president. There will be the people to decide. But to open that capacity, to feel there's no limits in the sense of it's something marvelous for the people. And I think probably that's one of the best legacies in terms of strategic legacy that I could leave. And it was my privilege, in the good sense of privilege, but we need to do much more. And I believe that, well, I wanted to mention that I really enjoyed your story yesterday about the president and all that. But it's not only in the politics, you know. I remember a good friend of mine, he made his PhD on physics in Princeton. And he told me a story of Feynman. Is that a very important? Feynman told him a story that I'm not sure if he won the Nobel Prize for his theory or something, but was very important. So, but after some years of work, he realized that the theory was wrong. So he went to this World Congress on Feynman's theory, and he started the introduction saying, you know, I have realized that this theory is wrong. So everybody applauded frenetically, and then they continued discussing about Feynman's theory as nothing has happened. So it's not only in politics, it can be also in the academia. So we need really to always look at ourselves if we're doing the right thing, or things are the way, if the kind of actions we're doing, if they're really being effective, and that's the way I live in my life. I believe that education, quality education available to everyone, is the most fundamental basis for advancing for social mobilization for everyone, boys and girls, but also for advancing gender equality and women's empowerment. And I think armed with such an education and self-confidence that comes with it, there is no limit of what women can do, provided they have equal access to job and career opportunities and determination to change the world. But I would like to tell you two more things. I think that when I saw what happened in Afghanistan, and because of the Qurans that had been burned here in the US, I thought also that the universities need to do much more on promoting tolerance, how could I say, the value of diversity, intercultural understanding, mutual respect in terms of culture and religion with men and women. And also I believe that one of the outcomes of the colloquium should be also a strong commitment to link academic work to engender human development and peace building around the world, because I think this will also be very important in contributing in advancing in a better world for all, for women and men. And when we are working on gender equality and women's empowerment, it's because we really want a better world for women and men. And so I thank you very much, and whatever questions you have, please go ahead.